Before we begin, take a moment to reflect on this question. Why would the creator of the entire universe choose one small nation out of all the peoples of the earth? It's a question that has puzzled readers of the Bible for thousands of years. Some people assume it means God loved Israel more than everyone else. Others think it means Israel was somehow better, stronger, or more worthy. But the Bible tells a very different story. The real reason God chose Israel is one of the most surprising and humbling truths in all of Scripture. And once you understand it, the entire storyline of the Bible starts to make sense. If you enjoy discovering the deeper meaning behind Bible stories explained simply, consider subscribing and joining this growing community that explores God's Word together. Now, let's begin at the beginning of the story. Long before there was a nation called Israel, before there were kings, prophets, or even the law of Moses, the world had already begun drifting far away from God. Humanity had multiplied across the earth after the flood in the days of Noah. Families became tribes, tribes became nations, and civilizations began to rise. But as the nations grew, something else spread with them: pride. People began to believe they could build their own greatness without God. This pride reached its peak in a place called Babel. The people gathered together with one goal: to build a tower that reached the heavens. They wanted to make a name for themselves. They wanted to prove that humanity could reach heaven on its own. Instead of spreading across the earth as God had commanded, they united in rebellion. So God intervened. He confused their languages and scattered them across the world. And just like that, the nations of the earth were born. From that moment on, humanity was divided into many peoples, many cultures, many languages. But something else happened. Most of those nations slowly drifted into worshiping false gods. Instead of worshiping the Creator, they began worshiping the creation: the sun, the moon, stars, statues made of stone and wood, kings and emperors who demanded to be treated like gods. Generation after generation, the knowledge of the true God faded from the earth. But God had not given up on humanity. Instead, he began a plan that would unfold slowly across centuries. A plan that would begin with one man. His name was Abram. Abram lived in a city called Ur, one of the great cities of ancient Mesopotamia. It was a wealthy and advanced civilization filled with temples, trade, and culture. But like the rest of the world, it was also filled with idol worship. Abram grew up surrounded by people who worshiped many gods. And yet, one day, something extraordinary happened. The true God spoke to him. God called Abram to leave everything he knew: his home, his relatives, his country, and travel to a land that God would show him. It must have sounded impossible. Abram was already 75 years old. He had no children. His wife, Sarah, was barren. There was no reason to believe that his future would become anything remarkable. But God made him a promise: I will make you into a great nation, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. That promise is the key to understanding why Israel exists. God did not choose Abram because he was powerful. Abram had no kingdom. God did not choose him because he was wealthy. He owned no empire. God did not choose him because he had a great army. He had none. God chose Abram because through him God would begin restoring the world. Abram believed God, and that faith changed history. He left Ur and began traveling toward the land of Canaan, trusting that somehow God would fulfill his promise. Years passed, still no child. Decades passed, still nothing. By human logic, the promise seemed impossible. Abram grew old. Sarah grew old. But one night God took Abram outside and showed him the stars. Look up at the sky, God said. Count the stars if you can. So shall your descendants be. It sounded unbelievable. Yet Abram believed, and the Bible says that his faith was credited to him as righteousness. Finally, when Abram was 100 years old and Sarah was 90, the miracle happened. Sarah gave birth to a son. They named him Isaac. Isaac would grow up and have 2 sons of his own, Esau and Jacob. And it was Jacob who would eventually receive the name Israel. Jacob's life was far from perfect. In fact, he began his story as a deceiver. He tricked his brother. He manipulated his father. He ran from the consequences of his actions. But God did not abandon him. One night Jacob wrestled with God until daybreak. And during that strange and mysterious encounter, God gave him a new name, Israel, which means one who wrestles with God. Jacob would go on to have 12 sons. Those 12 sons would become the 12 tribes of Israel. But at this point, they were still just one family, a small group of shepherds living among powerful nations. Nothing about them looked impressive. Nothing about them suggested they would one day become the people through whom God would change the world. And that was exactly the point. Later in the Bible, God explains this directly. In Deuteronomy, God tells Israel something remarkable. The Lord did not set his affection on you and choose you because you were more numerous than other peoples, for you were the fewest of all peoples. But it was because the Lord loved you and kept the oath he swore to your ancestors. In other words, God did not choose Israel because of their greatness. He chose them because of his promise, and because through them he intended to reveal himself to the entire world. Israel was meant to be a light among the nations. Through them the world would learn who the true God is. Through them the law would be given. Through them the prophets would speak. Through them the scriptures would be written. And most importantly, through them the Messiah would come. That was the real purpose of Israel, not to keep God to themselves, but to carry the knowledge of God into history until the time came for salvation to reach every nation. But that mission would not be easy. The family of Israel soon found themselves in Egypt during a terrible famine. At first they were welcomed because Joseph, one of Jacob's sons, had risen to power there. But generations later, a new Pharaoh came to power, and he feared the growing population of the Israelites. So he enslaved them. For hundreds of years they lived in harsh labor. They built cities. They carried stones. They suffered under oppression. From the outside it looked as if God's chosen people had been forgotten. But God had not forgotten them. One day a baby boy was born during this time of slavery. His name was Moses. Pharaoh had ordered that Hebrew baby boys be killed, but Moses' mother hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she placed him in a basket and set him afloat on the Nile River. In a strange twist of fate, Pharaoh's own daughter discovered the baby and adopted him. So Moses grew up in the palace of Egypt. But God had a much greater plan for him. When Moses was older, God appeared to him in a burning bush in the wilderness. The bush was on fire, but was not being consumed. From the flames God spoke, "I have seen the suffering of my people in Egypt, and I have come down to rescue them." God sent Moses back to Egypt to confront Pharaoh, and through a series of miraculous events known as the 10 plagues, God forced Pharaoh to release the Israelites. For the first time in generations, the people of Israel stood on the edge of freedom. For more than 400 years they had lived as slaves in Egypt. Entire lifetimes had passed beneath the weight of forced labor. Fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters had all been born into a world where crack of overseers' whips and the endless heat of construction fields defined daily life. Many of them had never known anything else. But now, after the final plague struck Egypt and the firstborn of the land died in a single night, Pharaoh's resistance finally broke. In the middle of the night, he sent word to Moses and Aaron. "Leave," he said. "Go, take your people, and worship the Lord as you have asked." The command spread quickly through the Israelite homes. Families gathered their belongings in haste. Bread was prepared without time for the dough to rise. Animals were gathered. Children were awakened from sleep. There was a strange mixture of emotions in the air. Excitement, fear, uncertainty. Freedom had finally come, but no one knew what the future would look like. And so, under the leadership of Moses, the people began to leave Egypt. Not just a few families, not just a small tribe, but an enormous multitude. The Bible describes hundreds of thousands of men, along with women and children, forming a massive caravan stretching across the land. Some historians estimate that the total number of people may have been over 2 million. It was one of the largest migrations in the ancient world. As they moved away from the cities of Egypt and toward the wilderness, something extraordinary guided them. During the day, a towering pillar of cloud moved ahead of the people. At night, that cloud became a pillar of fire. It lit the darkness and showed them the path forward. This visible sign reminded them that God himself was leading their journey. But freedom did not immediately bring peace. In fact, one of the most dramatic moments in Israel's history happened only days after they left Egypt. Pharaoh soon began to regret his decision. The loss of the Israelite workforce was devastating to Egypt's economy. Anger replaced grief. Pride replaced fear. And Pharaoh made a decision that would change everything. He ordered his army to pursue the Israelites. Egypt's military forces were among the most powerful in the ancient world. Their chariots were fast and deadly. Their soldiers were highly trained. Soon the thunder of hooves and wheels echoed across the desert. The Israelites saw the army approaching. Ahead of them was the Red Sea. Behind them was Pharaoh's army. Panic spread through the people. They turned to Moses in desperation. Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? Why did you do this to us? Did we not say in Egypt that we should just serve the Egyptians? Fear has a way of making people forget miracles. Only days earlier they had witnessed God's power over Egypt. But now, standing between the sea and an army, they saw no escape. Moses answered them calmly. Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Then God gave Moses a command. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea. Moses obeyed, and something astonishing happened. A powerful wind began blowing across the water. Slowly and possibly, the sea began to divide. Walls of water rose on both sides, and a dry path appeared through the middle. The Israelites began to walk forward. Men, women, children, and animals passed between the towering walls of water. Step by step they crossed the sea. Pharaoh's army chased after them, confident they could capture the escaping slaves. But once the last Israelite reached the opposite shore, God told Moses to stretch out his hand once more. The waters collapsed. The sea returned to its place, and the army of Egypt disappeared beneath the waves. The people of Israel stood safely on the other side. For the first time in centuries, they were truly free. The scene that followed was filled with celebration. Moses and the Israelites sang a song of victory. I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Both horse and driver he has hurled into the sea. Miriam, Moses' sister, led the women with tambourines and dancing. It was a moment of pure joy. But the journey was only beginning. Freedom from Egypt did not mean immediate arrival in the Promised Land. Between Egypt and Canaan lay a vast and unforgiving wilderness, and the wilderness would become a place of testing. Days passed. The excitement of the escape began to fade. Water became scarce. Food supplies ran low. Once again, the people began to complain. In the desert of Sin, hunger spread among the people. They turned to Moses and Aaron. If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt, they said. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death. God heard their complaints, and instead of abandoning them, he responded with provision. The next morning, something strange covered the ground like frost. It looked like small white flakes. The people asked one another, "What is it?" In Hebrew, that question sounds like the word manna, and that became its name. Manna became their daily bread. Each morning the people gathered it from the ground, and each evening God provided quail for meat. For 40 years, throughout their time in the wilderness, God fed them this way. He also gave them water in miraculous ways. At one point, when the people were desperate for water, God told Moses to strike a rock with his staff. When he did, water poured out, enough to satisfy the entire nation. Yet even with these miracles, the people struggled with faith. The wilderness exposed their fears, their doubts, their impatience. Eventually they reached Mount Sinai, and there's something happened that would define Israel forever. God invited the people into a covenant. The mountain shook with thunder and lightning. Smoke covered its peak. A trumpet blast echoed across the camp, and God spoke. From that mountain came the 10 Commandments. They were not just rules. They were the foundation of a new kind of society, a society where God himself would be king. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make idols. Honor your father and mother. You shall not murder. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness. You shall not covet. These commandments formed the heart of the law. They taught Israel how to live as God's people. But even while Moses was on the mountain, receiving these commandments, something tragic happened below. Days had passed, then weeks. The people of Israel stood at the foot of Mount Sinai, watching the mountain that burned with fire and thunder. Lightning flashed through the clouds that wrapped around its peak. Smoke rose like a furnace into the sky. They had heard the voice of God. They had trembled at the sound of it. But now Moses was gone. 40 days had passed since he climbed the mountain. And slowly, something dangerous began to grow. The same God who had split the Red Sea now felt distant to them. The man who had spoken to God on their behalf had disappeared into the fire and smoke. Whispers began to spread through the camp. What happened to Moses? Maybe he died up there. How long are we supposed to wait? People began gathering around Aaron, Moses' brother, who had been left in charge of the people. At first, it was just a few voices. Then it became a crowd. Finally, they said the words that revealed what was happening in their hearts. Come, they said to Aaron, make us gods who will go before us. As for this Moses who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. It was a shocking request. After everything they had seen, after the plagues, after the Red Sea, after hearing God speak from the mountain, they still wanted something they could see, something they could touch, something familiar. This is one of the deepest struggles of the human heart. Faith trusts in what cannot be seen, but fear pushes people to create something visible to control. Aaron faced a moment that would shape history. Instead of resisting the crowd, he gave in. Take off the gold earrings that your wives, sons, and daughters are wearing, Aaron told them. Bring them to me. The people quickly removed their jewelry. The gold was collected. Aaron melted it down. Then he shaped it into the form of a calf, a golden calf. When the people saw it, they shouted with excitement, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." The words were shocking. The calf had done nothing. It had no life, no power. Yet the people celebrated it as their deliverer. Aaron even built an altar in front of it and announced a festival. Tomorrow there will be a celebration to the Lord. The next day the people rose early. They offered sacrifices. They ate and drank. Then the celebration turned into something chaotic. Dancing, shouting, wild celebration around the golden idol. Meanwhile, high above them on Mount Sinai, God spoke to Moses. Go down, God said, because your people, whom you brought up out of Egypt, have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them. They have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it. God had every right to judge them. They had broken the covenant almost immediately. They had turned to idolatry even while God was revealing his law. God said to Moses, I have seen these people. They are a stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them and that I may destroy them. Then God said something remarkable. Then I will make you into a great nation. In that moment, Moses faced a choice. God was offering him the chance to begin a new nation through him. But Moses did something extraordinary. Instead of accepting the offer, he pleaded for the people. Lord, Moses said, why should your anger burn against your people, whom you brought out of Egypt with great power? Why should the Egyptians say you rescued them only to destroy them in the wilderness? Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore promises. Moses appealed to God's character, to his promises, to his mercy. And the Bible says something remarkable. The Lord relented. He chose mercy instead of destruction. Then Moses began descending the mountain. In his hands were the stone tablets. They were written by the finger of God, the commandments carved into stone. Joshua, who had been waiting partway up the mountain, met Moses as he came down. Joshua heard noise from the camp. It sounds like war, he said. But Moses listened carefully. It is not the sound of victory, he replied. It is not the sound of defeat. It is the sound of singing. As they reached the camp, the truth became visible. The golden calf stood at the center. People danced around it. Music echoed across the camp. When Moses saw it, anger filled him. He threw the tablets from his hands. They shattered at the foot of the mountain. Then he confronted the idol. He took the calf, burned it in fire, ground it into powder, scattered it across water, and made the people drink it. Then Moses turned to Aaron. "What did these people do to you?" he asked, "that you led them into such great sin?" Aaron's response revealed the confusion and pressure of that moment. "Do not be angry, my lord," Aaron said. "You know how prone these people are to evil. They said to me, 'Make us gods who will go before us.' So I told them to bring me their gold. I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf." It was an attempt to avoid responsibility, but the damage had already been done. The camp had fallen into chaos. Moses stood at the entrance of the camp and called out, "Whoever is for the Lord, come to me." Members of the tribe of Levi gathered around him. Order was restored. The rebellion was stopped, but the consequences of sin still remained. The next day Moses told the people, "You have committed a great sin, but now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for you." Moses climbed the mountain again, and once again he spoke to God on behalf of the people. "Oh, what a great sin these people have committed." Moses said, "They have made themselves gods of gold. But now please forgive their sin. And if not, then blot me out of the book you have written." It was a powerful moment. Moses offered himself for the sake of the people, but God replied that each person must answer for their own sin. Still, God chose to continue leading Israel. The covenant was renewed. Moses was given new stone tablets, and the journey continued. But the lesson of the golden calf would remain with Israel for generations. It revealed something about human nature. Even after miracles, even after freedom, even after hearing the voice of God, the human heart can still drift toward idols. Idols are not always statues. Sometimes they are power, sometimes wealth, sometimes success, sometimes anything that replaces trust in God. That was a deeper lesson hidden in the story of the golden calf. It wasn't just about a statue made of gold. It was about the human heart. People often imagine idols as ancient objects made of stone or metal, but the truth is that idols have always been much more subtle than that. An idol is anything that begins to take the place that only God should hold. For Israel, in that moment at Sinai, the golden calf became a symbol of something they could see, control, and understand. It felt safer than trusting the invisible God who spoke from thunder and fire. But trust was exactly what God was teaching them in the wilderness, because the wilderness had a purpose. It was not simply a long journey between Egypt and the Promised Land. It was a place where God was shaping a people. In Egypt, they had lived as slaves. Their identity had been defined by Pharaoh. Their daily life had been controlled by taskmasters. Their future had seemed hopeless. But God did not want Israel to remain a nation of slaves. He wanted them to become a people who trusted him. So the wilderness became their classroom. Every day, they learned a new lesson about dependence. Each morning, they gathered manna from the ground. They could not store it for weeks or months. If they tried to hoard it, it spoiled overnight. God was teaching them something important. Trust me today. Tomorrow I will provide again. This daily provision slowly reshaped their understanding of life. Their survival did not depend on Pharaoh. It depended on God. Their food did not come from Egypt's fields. It came from heaven. Their water did not come from rivers. It came from rocks in the desert. Their direction did not come from kings or generals. It came from a pillar of cloud and fire. Step by step, the people of Israel began to understand what it meant to live under the care of God, but the lessons were not always easy. In fact, the wilderness revealed how deeply the habits of slavery were still rooted in their hearts. Sometimes when the journey became difficult, they looked back toward Egypt with surprising longing. It may sound strange. Why would anyone want to return to slavery? But memory has a way of softening the past. When hunger struck, some people began to complain. "We remember the fish we ate in Egypt," they said. "We remember the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. Now we have nothing but this manna." They had forgotten the chains. They had forgotten the beatings. They had forgotten the oppression. All they could remember were the meals. And so the wilderness revealed another truth. Freedom is not only about leaving slavery behind. It is about learning a new way to live. God was not simply rescuing Israel from Egypt. He was transforming them into a new kind of people. That transformation took time, and sometimes it took painful lessons. One of the most significant moments came when the people reached the border of the land God had promised to Abraham. The land of Canaan lay before them. It was a fertile region filled with cities and farmland, but it was also occupied by powerful nations. God instructed Moses to send 12 men into the land to explore it. These men were leaders from the 12 tribes of Israel. They were spies sent to observe the land and report back. For 40 days they traveled through Canaan. They saw its fields, its cities, its people. When they returned, they carried with them proof of the land's abundance. One cluster of grapes was so large it had to be carried on a pole between 2 men. The land was indeed rich and fruitful. But the report from the spies quickly divided the people. 10 of the spies focused on the danger. The people who live there are powerful, they said. The cities are fortified and very large. We even saw giants there. We seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes. Fear spread quickly through the camp. The people began to panic again. All the old doubts returned. We should choose a leader and go back to Egypt, some said. It was a golden calf all over again in a different form. Instead of trusting God's promise, they trusted their fear. But 2 of the spies had a very different perspective. Their names were Joshua and Caleb. They stood before the people and spoke with courage. The land we passed through is exceedingly good, they said. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land. Do not rebel against the Lord. Do not be afraid of the people of the land. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. The difference between the 2 groups of spies was not their intelligence. It was their faith. 10 spies saw giants. 2 spies saw God. But the majority of the people believed the fearful report. They refused to enter the land. And that decision became one of the most tragic turning points in Israel's story. God had brought them out of Egypt. He had parted the sea. He had fed them in the desert. He had guided them day and night. Yet when the moment came to trust him completely, the people turned back. Because of that decision, God declared that the generation who had left Egypt would not enter the promised land. Instead, they would wander in the wilderness for 40 years, until a new generation was ready to take their place. It was a sobering lesson. Distrust has consequences. Faith matters. Years passed. The wilderness journey continued. Children grew up hearing stories about Egypt that they themselves had never experienced. They heard about the Red Sea, about the plagues, about the pillar of fire, about the golden calf. And slowly a new generation emerged. This generation had not seen the chains of Egypt, but they had learned the lessons of the wilderness. Finally, after 40 years, the people of Israel reached the border of the promised land once again. This time they stood on the eastern side of the Jordan River. The wilderness was finally behind them. In front of them stretched the land their ancestors had spoken about for centuries. The hills of Canaan rose in the distance, covered with fields, vineyards, and ancient cities surrounded by strong walls. For the first time, the people of Israel were not looking back at Egypt. They were looking forward. Joshua stood before the people as their new leader. He had been with Moses for decades. He had seen the miracles, the failures, the lessons of the wilderness. Now the responsibility of leading the nation rested on his shoulders. But before the people moved forward, God reminded Joshua of something important. Be strong and courageous, God said. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Soon the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant stepped toward the Jordan River. It was springtime, and the river was overflowing its banks. The water rushed quickly through the valley. Yet the moment the priest's feet touched the water, something incredible happened. The river stopped flowing. Upstream the waters piled up, and the riverbed became dry. Just like the Red Sea years before, God made a path. The entire nation crossed the Jordan on dry ground. When the last person reached the other side, Joshua commanded 12 men, one from each tribe, to take stones from the riverbed and build a memorial. These stones will remind future generations of what God had done. When your children ask what these stones mean, Joshua said, "Tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord." It was a reminder that their story was not about their own strength. It was about God's faithfulness. From Abraham's first step of faith, to the escape from Egypt, to the wilderness lessons, to the crossing of the Jordan, every part of the journey showed the same truth. God had chosen Israel not because they were the greatest nation, but because through them he would reveal himself to the world. And centuries later, that purpose would reach its greatest moment, because from the people of Israel would come the one who would bless every nation, Jesus, the Savior who would open the way back to God for all humanity. The story of Israel was never meant to end with one nation. It was meant to lead the entire world back to the Creator. And that is why God chose Israel, not to exclude the world, but to save it. If this story helped you understand the Bible in a simple and powerful way, subscribe and join this journey through the greatest story ever told, because sometimes one small nation can change the destiny of the entire world.